now may, the impression in the Tory party may be a good one of Cameron, and that therefore increases the chances of his legacy continuing with the new, with his successor. And indeed, already most candidates are within that modernising box. There's kind of subtleties. Theresa May is slightly different on immigration, Boris slightly different on the EU, but broadly they're within that modernising camp, and I expect some kind of moderniser to take over, but of course there are subtleties in difference. As I said, I think Osborne, his reputation has been very much a roller coaster since 2010. I suspect he won't run, and it looks like he may get behind Boris. Nick Boles has already come out today, who's a kind of arch moderniser in favour of Boris. But I think Team Cameron broadly is quite divided over Theresa and Boris, but I suspect they are the front runners for it. In terms of kind of the positioning, as I said, it's about the model of the relationship with Europe, and I think there are broadly kind of two arguments. One, the economic liberals within the Conservative Party, the kind of Osbornites, Philip Hammond, very much emphasising the need to stay in the single market. You saw that from the Foreign Secretary yesterday. But on the other hand, there'll be people who say, well, hang on a minute, most people who voted for Brexit are concerned about immigration. So there needs to be some kind of action to mitigate freedom of movement. So I think that's where the debate will be. Do we prioritise the single market, or do we do more to reduce immigration? And I think that will be where the contest is in terms of the leadership race. I suspect Theresa as well will want to show more Euroscepticism. So Boris will want to show more modernising, as he's covered that box. I think Theresa will want to show more hard-line stuff. So I suspect, for example, on the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, that may be a big issue which is dividing the different camps. All candidates will say they want to bring the party together. Chris Grayling has mentioned that in the Times today. Very much about healing. But I think there are, there is a lot of scepticism, particularly on the Remain side, a lot of hard feelings. You saw that from Anna Soubry at the weekend towards the way that Vote Leave conducted their campaign. So as much as the rhetoric may be we're all coming together, I think there is bad blood that's going to be spilt in the Conservative Party in the months ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For those of you that came a little bit late, we're recording this, and I think we're going to try and put it up on our website later today, if technology works. Mm-hmm. But we've now got Sundar Katwala from British Future. I think he's going to draw our issues together and discuss some of the long-term implications and big issues in the campaign, and looking at where we go from here.
Thanks very much, Jill. Thanks everyone for coming. Well, a massively historic event in British history, and still a surprising one for many people. Even at 10 o'clock on Thursday night, people thought it might be 51 or 52% for Remain, and it turned out to be 52% for Leave. So you have a clear democratic decision to leave. You have a nation divided, 17 million versus 16 million. So it's quite important to think about how we deal with that. Why did it tilt that way? I think it was a vote of no confidence in the case that the government and the Prime Minister made, as he's recognised. I think the question on the ballot paper was about whether or not being in the European Union was now the best way to pursue Britain's interests and values compared to institutionally not being in it anymore. And people were on a knife edge about that, and had it been the other way, we'd have said, well, people were very worried about immigration, but actually the economic risks counter too much. This way round, we can say, well, the economic risks worried people, of course, and that's why 48% of them voted that way. But in the end, the issues of cost, I think cost was a really important issue in this thing. You can squabble about the slogan that was used or the number that was used, but when someone says £350 million a week and you say, actually, I think you'll find it's £200 million a week, the question for the public was, do we get out of it enough for what we put in? And they didn't know enough about what we got out of it to do that. And Britain has never been, obviously, a fully committed, fully engaged member of the European Union. We joined it late, De Gaulle thought it was a mistake for us to do so. He'd be saying, "I told you so," from wherever he is right now. We joined it for different reasons to other people. We joined what was a peace project and a political project and an identity project for post-war Europe for pragmatic economic reasons because of the British economy in the 1970s. We were never entirely comfortable with a club that other people had shaped and that we'd joined late. But the view in Britain was always, it's a price worth paying. The hassles, bureaucracy, multilateralism, free movements, price worth paying to their economic benefits. And I think in a way the European Union, the case for it failed on pragmatic grounds. The sort of, is it a price worth paying? In the era of the Eurozone, when we're never going to be fully engaged in the Euro, we were already halfway out. People were not convinced that it was worth being in it, given that free movement was part of the deal, and that was the way the debate came out. There was also, of course, a big vote of no confidence in all of the experts, nationally, internationally, the International Monetary Fund, the Bank of England, partly because correct stories about warnings about the short-term economic impacts were mixed up with things that were credible because they weren't true. You know, World War III was not is not a likely consequence. There's lots to be worried about, but not that. You know, George Osborne made up an emergency budget that people stopped believing it actually, because mixed up, I think, credible risks with incredible scares. Actually, you decline, your trust losers overall. So that's where we are now. But also, you know, what the Remain camp did throughout this referendum, and it won 70% of the graduate vote, and 1 in 4 people went to university in this country, more than ever before. But throughout this referendum, the Remain camp talked in broadsheet to graduates, really. Graduates talking to graduates, and telling people that it's important for the economy when all of the voices of people doing well for the economy. It was just incredibly hard to get people who are struggling in this economy to say, I think I should vote for Remain, I think I should vote for the status quo, I think I should vote for more of the same. I think people know they're taking quite a big risk, but they didn't see why they should turn up and vote for more of the same. That's why it tilted that way. What we've got is a nation divided and a lot of anxiety. Had it been a narrow victory for Remain, we'd be saying we must deal with the anxiety people have about immigration that continues and show them that we can control the impact even though they're keeping free movement. Instead, we've got anxiety in liberal London, in Manchester, in the university towns. You know, people saying, I want my country back now. How come they've got their country back? And there's a profound polarisation, I think, between 10-20% of people on both sides. The people who already knew when this referendum was cast which they would be voting didn't need to watch it. But actually, on both sides of this debate, the voters who get you from 25 to 50% have got much more in common with each other than they have with the flanks of their own debate, and I think it's important to remember that. It's also important when we say, you know, this was a tale of 4 nations, in that, you know, Scotland voted in, London voted in, but the rest of England voted out. Wales voted out, Northern Ireland voted out, but Catholics voted in, Protestants mostly voted out in Northern Ireland. It's worth remembering, in all those cases, that's a generalisation about the fact that, you know, 40% of Scots voted out. In London, 2.2 million voted Remain. 1.5 million Londoners voted to leave. It's more people who voted for Sadiq Khan for mayor. And so there's almost nowhere outside Gibraltar and bits of Catholic Northern Ireland where you'd have to knock on more than 4 doors to actually find Remain voters and Leave voters living in the same street, going to the same barbecue. So I think the media will talk us into a culture war, a culture clash, a class war, a generational conflict. Those are true demographic generalisations about the weight of the vote. Probably about 1 million ethnic minority voters voted for Leave, even if 2/3 voted the other way. So it's worth remembering that anything that happens in Britain, there'll be Remain and Leave voters in the room, and that, you know, we've got to work with that. So I think the alliances will be very different now between irreconcilable Remain and pragmatic was Remain on Thursday, want a moderate result, and I want to work with it, between liberal global Brexit and narrow closed Brexit. And the alliances between the pragmatic former Remainers and pragmatic Leavers are potentially strong if those bridges are built. And the question is whether they will be now. I think the tone that the leaders of the Leave campaign take is incredibly important. I don't think there's much sense in 3 million of 16 million people on the losing side signing a petition to have another go next week. I think that's basically an exercise in distraction and denial. If you look at it through the lens of party politics, it makes sense if you're a Liberal Democrat Tim Farron is saying we are the 48%. What he means is we were the 8% last year. We'd love to be the 16% next year, and that's very good party politics if you're the Liberal Democrats, but it's not really thinking, I think, about the national question. I think the Conservatives, as Ryan has said, will find it rather easier for a party that, on balance, decided to be stay-in sceptics. I think they can almost all be pragmatic outers. You know, the day after, there isn't much sort of Michael Heseltine, Ken Clarke sentiment left in this generation of the Tory party. And the poor Labour Party will be torn in pieces between people in London and university towns who are saying, can we stop it? And I'd like to see whether the Labour Party in Wales wants to stand on a reverse the result ticket, or in the North East. So I think the Labour Party will be torn. But I think we need politicians to think above party politics now and talk to people who feel anxious about the type of country. And they need to say to people what wasn't on the ballot paper as well as what was. What wasn't on the ballot paper was the question, do you want to live in 2016 or 1974? We're going to live in 2016 having decided to leave the European Union. If there are people who voted to put society back 50 years, they're going to be disappointed. And they need to hear that they're going to be disappointed. It wasn't even about, although it will be taken as a message to the rest of Europe and a message about ourselves, it wasn't about whether we want to engage in the world. It was about how we do so, the way in which we engage with other countries. But it's incredibly important for the Leave voices to say this, I think, as Ryan has been saying. They will. An issue that I think is very important is that 3 million Europeans are living in Britain. They don't know what this means. They're very anxious about it. We made efforts before the referendum with the Institute of Directors, with other think tanks, with migrants groups, supported as well by Migration Watch and UKIP and the Leave campaigns, to say these people's lives shouldn't be on the ballot paper. They didn't hear that message because the government